Welcome to the It Matters podcast. I'm your host, Walter Perez, and let's dive in as we help you grow your mindset and elevate your leadership. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the It Matters podcast. We're here today with a new episode, and I've been looking forward to having a conversation with my guest for quite a while, actually, since day one, legitimately. Even before I started this podcast, you guys were on my mind. Jim and Brenda Regehr, you guys are dear to my heart, and you guys are transitional leaders. And I want to unpack that today a little bit, but I'm excited that you guys made it into the studio. For those of you on YouTube, you're seeing a little bit of a different setup, but we're going to have the same type of conversation, one that will help you as leaders, regardless of where you're at. So Jim and Brenda, welcome to the It Matters podcast.
Thank you. We're glad to be here.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
It's so good. And then you guys live in the same city as me too, so it was so easy to reach out to you. But as we get going, tell us a little bit about yourselves. I mean, you guys have a busy life in this season of life, but tell us a little bit more how you got into transitional leading.
Well, it started back in the days when we lived in Fort McMurray. And up there, the average age was around 29. The churches that we were serving in were all focused at about 45 to 50-year-olds. And I saw the need for a church to change its focus. And that required me to think about transition. In that same time, Brenda took a course with her career, looking at transition through the work of William Bridges.
Okay.
And in his work, we saw a tool that we felt we could use. And so out of that, I went out to do some studies on it. And when I finished the studies, I resigned my position in the church and started making myself available to help organizations transition.
And we've both been involved in leadership for a number of years, obviously. And then when Jim, he began working with different organizations and churches in doing transition. And I found it fascinating as well. And so there came a time that it just worked out well to both of us to become a team. We have different skill sets, different giftings. And so it's really fun to work together and to lead people through change and transition. Probably a good place just to let you know that change is what happens when it's circumstantial. It's maybe you move a city, you change a job. That's a change. But transition is that psychological, the emotional, the internal process that you have to go through. So big difference. People think they're the same, but they're not. And so many changes fail completely because they didn't go through a good transition process. So that's how we got into it. So we've been doing it together for about 13 years, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, this has always been fascinating to me ever since I met you for the first time. I wonder, though, like when you got into this line of work, did you feel that it was really needed in that season? Like, did you feel or did you see it out in the marketplace going, okay, leaders need to learn how to do this? Or has this always been kind of a need, in time? Or what would you say about that?
Yeah, I think that when you look around at organizations, churches being one of those, but at any business, often a business will, let's say, start a new product. And whatever happens, it fails. And when you look at it, part of the reason it failed was because there wasn't enough preparation of the sales staff. They weren't transitioning to a new market that they were going to work with. And so in a business world, as in a church world, when you make a change, it puts you in a different position. So, for instance, we served a church, or we were attending a church, and they moved from the facility they were in to a new facility. Now, that's a change. The pastor was wise enough, invited us to come in and help him. And we pulled together a team of congregants, and we developed a transition team that helped them steer the congregation through that transition. So a little thing, they were meeting in a theater, Cineplex.
Okay.
They were used to smelling popcorn on a Sunday morning, but the new facility had no popcorn. So on the last day, they took and they served popcorn to everybody that came in as a saying, this is what we experienced, but we're going to have something new at the new place.
This is what we're leaving. This is part of the grieving. It's just going to be something different, but it's helping them work through the psychological aspects. But here's, Jim and I were talking about it today as we were thinking about this time with you, Walter. And we were thinking about how families make transitions. And we didn't always do it well. We'll give you an example. So let's say mom and dad are thinking about a move. They're going to move. They're going to move cities. They're going to change jobs. That is a huge decision. So they probably agonize through a lot of thought process, the two of them. And then guess what happens? Hey, kids, guess what? We're going to be moving to X, Y, or Z. And the kids are now aware of the change, but they've not had a time. They've not had that process to transition it, that chance to psychologically, why are we doing this? I'm upset about this. What do I do with all these emotions that are happening inside?
I'm missing all my friends.
I'm going to miss all my friends, all those kinds of things. And so when we were talking about it, in some of the transitions we've done, with our family even, we didn't give them a chance to transition. We just alerted them to the change. So is it a need? I think so, absolutely, because so many changes don't go well because you haven't helped them work through the process of transition. So
seems to me like human nature here that we're always going to be caught up in transition in one shape or form. And you both have mentioned it very beautifully here. What makes me think here is that the real question is, are you doing a good transition or a bad transition?
Right.
Is that a correct way of saying that?
That's fair to say.
You can manage it or you can let it happen. And if you let it happen, it can go off the rails very quickly, right?
Here's an interesting thing that I think what most excited me about when I first took the course with William Bridges' material, and so very helpful. But sometimes a change happens and we need to transition as individuals. Right. And other times we begin to feel a transition happening within us. And as a result of that triggers us to need a change. So take a job, for instance. Some of the signs of ending in a transition is that you begin to feel disengaged or you begin to dismantle I'm not associated with this as much. I'm disidentifying with my current role. That sort of thing, we see them as they're the 5 disses that William Bridges talks about. And we see disses as bad, but they're not, because they actually alert us to the fact that something is changing internally and maybe we need to trigger a change. On the other hand, if the change came, let's say somebody was fired, let's say they just got married, it could be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. That's your change. But all of those things need to happen too. You need to disengage from your previous life and you need to now re-identify,
move from being single to being a family.
Yeah.
Right.
Move from having great independence to having to tell your spouse everything.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
It's true.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, no secrets. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, even in a previous conversation, I think, Brenda, you pointed out, even when having multiple kids and your family's growing, those are different transitions that take place.
For sure.
And maybe it's important for us to call it out, because if we try to coast through life with these transitions that are happening and we're not paying attention to it, it could end up being detrimental, right? You can end up hurting your family in that process.
Absolutely. So yes, to answer your first question, that transition is really important. And if we're not going to tackle that, we may bear the consequences of a change that doesn't go well, whether it be our family, be our job, whatever it might be.
There's so much that I want to unpack here, but as we move on, I wanted to point out that your transition work has actually taken you in a few different places, different cities, and even across the ocean, across the sea. And you did some work in Spain, correct?
Yes. And also in France.
And in France, that's right. And maybe at the risk of just stating the obvious, but did you find that the work just transferred over pretty much the same as North America, or did you see some different changes? I mean, as I'm saying this, I'm also thinking there's probably some cultural barriers and all that, but how was that experience going overseas?
Transition is a human experience, not a national experience.
Yeah.
So no, we didn't see anything significantly different transition-wise.
Right.
Certainly, you get used to our culture, our way of doing things. But when you get into another culture, whether it be Spanish or, well, any culture, even a French culture, there are things that you have to adjust to. So part of the transition for us going into another culture is understanding the culture. So here's when we disassociate with North Americans. Now we're associating with Europeans.
Right.
Politically, family, there's lots of things that are totally different in terms of how they see things. In the Spanish context, family is everything. And so in town here, how hard do you have to look for children's stores?
Not really hard.
Well, in Spain, on our block, there was 4 children's stores. That's how important the kids are in their culture.
Oh, okay.
They're everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's a priority for them. And so it's those kinds of adjustments. You realize you're in a different world, different culture, and they value things differently. So when you're working with them, trying to lead them, their values are different. So you have to take into account those things.
That's interesting, because out here I'm thinking, well, I know of a few kids stores, but I'm also in that season. But when you put it that way, it's like, okay, no, here I thought we're kind of valuing the family unit, but when you put it that way, it's like, okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah,
For sure. I think just along that point, understanding the differences for sure. But as Jim said, transition transcends everything. So, when we go there, we use the same process. And that is, before we assist a group, whether it be an organization or a company or a family or an individual or a church, in a transition, you need to understand where they're at. And so a lot of it is, assessing it in the early days. So what we spend a lot of time is listening to people and finding out what's important, like Jim is saying, and then finding out where they are and then helping them figure out where they want to go and what things they need to work through to get there successfully.
Something that I picked up as you guys started sharing was, you go over there to Spain and France, you are experiencing transition, even if it was just for a period.
Yes.
So here you're there being leaders that are helping them, but you're also living it in that moment. What a cool dynamic that created for you.
Yes, that's very true. And actually, it's helped us even in our own lives to recognize. So for instance, there's 3 stages of transition. Of course, it starts with an ending. Okay. Then you have the kind of that middle zone where it just feels so like you're up and down. It's in neutral zone, William Bridges would call it. And then you have a new beginning. And so sometimes just understanding how you can best navigate each of those stages really helps you. So when you're in that neutral zone and you don't know what your future holds, how do you navigate that well so that you, I'll just, spoiler alert, that sometimes it's tempting to go back. Just like the Israelites wanted to do, let's go back to Egypt because this is too hard. The promised land is not looking at all promising. Right. And so we want to go back, take us back. And so it's helped us in each of our own phases because transition is part of all of our lives, all of the time. And so, that part has been the journey. So you're so right. But it was a transition, even making a decision that we would go overseas. Jim had wanted to do an international experience for some time. And we had 7 grandbabies, and I did not want to do an international experience. But, as you work through what that change might look like, and you work through the psychological, the emotional, and the internal, which is transition, it's amazing. Yeah, it was a highlight of some of our work. So we're just very, very grateful for those years.
I love the way you said that. I want to make sure our audience doesn't miss this. So we got the 3 parts of transition: the ending, the neutral zone, and then beginning.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, those are the 3 key key points.
Every transition begins with an ending.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's obvious as we're talking about it, but you're right. We don't. And so maybe this is a good point of maybe to bring up how we met, because we met doing some church work. I was on a board at my current church, and we were stepping into transition and not realizing what that really entailed. Because in an organization like a church where there's a lot of bodies, a lot of different voices, we had different opinions about that. But in this scenario, our lead pastor had been there for 20 years, and he was moving along. And as we started going through this transition, for me, it was obvious, okay, the church needs to go through this transition well, because we need to end well, but we also need to kind of find our new identity, I guess, if we can put it that way. And so it was beautiful for me to meet you in that phase, because I learned so much from both of you. Yeah. And I get to sit here saying that I've experienced your work in those years. And so, so that, to me, what you're all saying, I can attest and say, yes, it's true and it works. But I'm so thankful for you too, and the work that you do, because that helped me understand why it was important for us to maneuver through that season.
One of the situations of the situation that you described is that the pastor there was well loved, had been 20 years, and that was a bit of a surprise. And well, many people sensed it, but it was a grief. And if a grief is not acknowledged, and you just move on and say, okay, we're going to get a new pastor, we're going to get a new leader, a new direction, let's go. Everybody be cheery about it. It just wouldn't have worked. And actually, we learned a lot by speaking with your former leader there. As we talked with people, almost everybody said that he had met with them individually, had shared with them that he felt it was time to move on, and that he expressed his thankfulness to people. And so really, when he did the formal announcement, people weren't as shocked. And so we were so impressed with how he did that. That doesn't always happen. Right. And there's a shock value. But at any rate, But that said, if there isn't a proper grieving, so an ending happens, but if there isn't that neutral zone, a chance to grieve, a chance to say, well, this is who we were under this leader, who are we without that leader? And
when you have a leader that's been around for 20 years, the vision of the congregation, corporately, you have a CEO that's been around for 20 years.
Yeah.
His vision, or the organization's vision, has really shaped to the point where it is his vision. You can't separate the two. So even corporately, businesses need to recognize if they have a long-term CEO, and anything more than 10 years probably is a good number to say is long-term, maybe even 5 years. But the reality is that when that person leaves, there's this whole gift set of leadership inputs that are being taken out that supported a very specific kind of vision. And that organization now needs to say, do we still need to make the same product as we did before, or sell it the same way? Because he insisted that we do it this way, but is there something new? And so for organizations to reflect on their culture, reflect on what they're doing, what their market is, and then make a decision about the way forward, it's a refreshing. It's a refreshing of the vision, and it might be similar to what the previous leadership had, but it will have a distinctiveness that is now owned by the employees, the members, whoever. And that engagement is critical to the success of the next phase. Because if you bring in a new leader without doing that transition, the grieving, letting go of, what you do is you have a group of people who are still, the new guy will never measure up. He will always fall short because he wasn't the old guy. But if you can help people let go of that character, those giftings, and see it as theirs, now they take ownership of a vision, and they invite someone new to come in that supports them in their vision, and it becomes a very dynamic element moving forward.
I love that you're breaking this up and giving us these different details, because maybe at the basic level, you can be like, we need transition because we had a bad leader and it was toxic and we need to figure out how to maneuver through that. And in the scenario that we were just talking about too, you were saying that the church, the organization was in a very decent, healthy scenario, right? A loved leader, but there needed to be transition because we needed to grieve that. And so
find a new vision.
Yes. Because 20 years this leader had been holding that. And so it's so important to understand that it's not just as simple as forgetting the past
No.
and trying to maneuver through that. It's actually way more than that. And I love how you're painting that picture for us.
Well, the other way of doing that then, though, is just realize that the previous leader, 20 years, he's brought an organization from here to here.
Right.
And now you need to understand what here is so that you can build on top of it, but with a vision that suits who you are now. Mm-hmm. And so you don't want to discount previous leadership. Right. You want to build on that leadership because it's a progression moving forward.
I think the other thing is not just about leadership. I think sometimes what we don't understand and what we have learned as we've delved into a number of situations is that oftentimes there are issues that have happened along the way that haven't been dealt with. Mm-hmm. And when where do you want to go? What's on your heart? Where does this company want to go? Any of those kinds of things. You begin to uncover some things that sometimes are like an onion, and you need to peel back the layers of the onion till you find out what the true issue is and then address it. And then you can move forward. And I think if I was to say, having watched as many as we've done, that if somebody had just come in and said, okay, I'm your new leader, let's go. One of the reasons they might fail is because something that they didn't even get to the bottom of, and they probably didn't even know because they're the new leader, it sabotages the ability to be effective moving forward. So that's one of the other aspects of transition. So yes, it's helping grieve, it's helping get new vision, but it's also helping identify, has there been something in our past that was great, and right, let's celebrate it, but was there something that was not really great and we didn't really deal with it, and do we need to deal with that before we move on? So
then am I correct in saying that it gives us an opportunity to heal?
Yes.
In that state.
Yeah.
Heal is one thing, but sometimes it needs even to be dealt with. In some of the situations, we found something
called surgery.
Yeah, sometimes you need to go back and kind of say, hey, there still seems to be some angst here. Let's have a conversation about it, where there's apology needs to be given, where something needs to be recalibrated. Let's do that.
So if there's an individual or a leader out there that is hesitant on taking the time to transition well, could that be potentially lack of awareness? Maybe they're afraid of what they might experience or find out in that process. Would that be something that might be happening, or what? Maybe I'm assuming you might have found some leaders that don't want to transition.
I don't think it's that they don't want to transition. I think it's more that they don't understand the need for it. Okay. Because let's just get this change done. We want to grow our company. We want to, we want to double our staff, whatever it is that we need to do. Let's go. We're ready to go. Oh, we need to deal with the psychological, emotional, and internal aspect of it. So I think it's more not understanding that change without dealing with transition will not bring them the results they want. But so sometimes I think it's just the hurriedness of it, if that makes sense, the desire to just get going and get that change bring action right away. And that's true. Transition also involves action, but it's just got a little bit different process.
Go ahead, Jim. Yeah.
I think that this whole idea of transition is fairly new. In that we went through the end of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. Organizations, that's what they would do. CEO would resign, they would just hire a new CEO. Pastor resigns, they would just hire a new pastor. Statistically, what people started to notice probably in the 80s and 90s is when they started looking at the frequency of success in those things, what they were finding is that the person who came in after a long-term CEO, let's say, they usually lasted only 3 to 5 years. And people realized that that following person was an unintentional transitional leader. It was not planned, it wasn't managed. And so the result is that they experienced transition, but it was a negative experience because they had to fire the guy right away. The same would happen in churches. And so that would be one of the things. One of the things that William Bridges did, and in the transition field right now, is the realization that transition is basically the cycle of grief. Okay. So it's just applied. And so the theory around grief is the same theory that is used or is foundational to transitional ministries.
Interesting.
And so there's a continuity from the individual grief to corporate grief. And so there is that parallel between the two. And that application has changed the way a lot of organizations have moved. And now we have a lot of companies that are in transition from the way things were done in the 20th century to a very different model of leadership that's emerging in the 21st century. And there's some people that don't want to make that change. And it's really hard for them in this time, in this season.
Right.
And so what's happening is that companies that are refusing to change are having retention problems. Right? Because the younger generation wants something very different than that. And so there are transitions that are related to organizational employment, but also culture.
Right.
And businesses have to deal with the cultural transitions that are going to have to occur for them to continue to be successful.
What I really pick up from this is having a healthy perspective on why transition is important. Like, it's not just about, like you mentioned, right? Just this person's done, bring in the next one, and then just keep on rolling. Yeah. And the reality is, like, if you realize the importance of transition and how, if it's done well, that it could help you, it will actually help you in the end goal that you have, that you're trying to skip to.
Yes.
Right there, it's important to, maybe we can say, pause and let's reassess, and let's make a plan and then work that plan.
Exactly. Recent situation that comes to my mind is someone, a leader who'd been there a long time, whose idea that, I'll do my own transition, another myth, I might say. And that meant, so we asked, what does that mean? Yeah. Well, I'm going to sit with my staff and my team and all the employees, etc. And we'll set what the vision is, and we'll, say what this is going to look like going forward. Well, whose vision is that going to be? That's going to be your past leaders and people there who have been, perhaps really respected that leadership. They're going to say, well, of course, we want it to be just like it was under you, Walter. We don't want to change things or whatever. So I think there is so many aspects of seeking to bring somebody in that will maybe provide different eyes and ears to see the situation, give people to speak freely, give opportunity to dream new dreams.
Yeah, let's unpack that a little bit. I'm glad you brought that up, because when you bring somebody else in, they're not invested in the way, like when in our scenario, like I had an investment into that group of people. There's history there, and that could cloud my thinking. It can cloud my vision. And so when individuals like you come in, you're coming in, okay, we know what has worked, hasn't worked. This is what we recommend. And you guide conversations, and you've done an amazing job of putting different groups together to make sure that you draw out of them. And some might say, well, this takes time. Yes. But in that time, though, it's incredible what is produced. And I think it's valuable. So I'm glad that you brought that up, that there is an importance of having somebody else come in and guide this transition.
And I think Jim was speaking earlier about how if you don't have a transition person, whether it be in your company or in a church or elsewhere, that first new leader may well be your transitional person, as Jim mentioned. I think I was just thinking as he was talking about that I'm sure out there somewhere there's a study that's been done of how many times the in-between person lasts, a year, 2 years, 3 years,
right.
And then they're let go or they quit because they're frustrated or whatever. So they have become a transitional pastor, transitional leader, transitional CEO without really knowing how to take that company through a transition. They may have come with great ideas of how to change things.
Even the right ideas.
Right ideas that but at the same time, they haven't addressed the other side of it, and as a result, it doesn't work. So, it just got me thinking. I think I'm going to go home and check to see because I think the numbers would be fairly high.
So this gets me thinking because part of our conversation has really focused on organizational transition, and just to pivot just a little bit, do you recommend then that if you have an individual that is doing transition in whatever shape or form, is this where mentorship and coaching becomes a very important thing? Having somebody that walks along with you and says, "Hey, have you thought of this?" It's not on a big level, but regardless, job transition, whatever's happening in your family, we can probably make a humongous list. But would you recommend that? Is that like why it's important to have coaches and mentors and people around us that speak into our lives?
Yeah, always. I mean, it's one of the things I appreciate about the younger generation these days is how the last staff that we worked with, almost everybody on that staff had a mentor / counselor / someone who they could go and talk to about their circumstances beyond the organization that they were part of. And we saw in a number of cases where those conversations they had helped them change the trajectory of their decision making.
Absolutely.
And the younger generation is like that. Our oldest son, we were talking with him one day, and he said, we mentioned this about the younger generation. He says, "Yeah, all my friends have counselors and everything." And he says, "I really feel left out."
I should get myself one. Yes.
So it is one of those things that it's changing. I mean, there's a greater awareness about mental health,
right,
particularly, but also the voice of a mentor, and the younger generation is looking for it.
Especially the time between when, let's say, somebody has left something and an ending is happening. Maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's a job, maybe they've moved communities, and the new beginning hasn't yet come. So that's again the neutral zone, right?
Yeah.
Very disorientating to people. At that point in time, you need someone that, or some sort of process for yourself to walk through that grieving, of course, and to kind of look through some of those aspects of, okay, who am I? Where do I want to go? Some of those questions. But then when you do get to the part and you come out of that disorienting time, you begin to enter into the new beginning. It's that fear of the unknown. It's the desire to maybe go back to old habits, and you need your friend, you need a counselor, you need whatever, you need a transition person to come into your life and to hold your feet to the fire, so to speak, and say, no, this is a new direction. And yes, it's new. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, but don't go back. And so, yes, to answer your question, I think sometimes we have it in a friend, sometimes we have it in a therapist, sometimes we have it in a transition leader, many in a coach, very small group, but very important.
Yeah.
I would say that just focusing a little bit on the neutral zone, one of the reasons it's so disorientating is when you go through an ending, let's say you change jobs.
Yep.
So you leave one job, whether you're fired or you make a decision to leave, and now you're going to move to a new position. There's a neutral zone between those two. When you're letting go of these relationships back here, but you haven't established the relationships in front of you. And so that's why it's disorientating. You do not have the normal, natural supports in place that you would typically have. And it's one of the reasons that we recommend things like journaling, where you take during that time, you start to journal what you're feeling, what you're thinking about. We recommend during that time doing inventories, personality inventories, to get a sense of understanding who I am, what motivates me, how do I make decisions, all those sorts of things. Because these are all things that start to define the kinds of roles that you might fit into. So whether it be Myers-Briggs, which is a tool that helps us understand how we make decisions,
Right.
or Strength Finders from Gallup,
Right.
which is a tool that shows you what your talents are.
Mm-hmm.
These are tools that then start to shape your understanding of what the next step could look like, what kind of position you would be interested in. And so the result is that neutral zone, investing in close friends, family, a small group, as Brenda mentioned. These are areas that we can create a smaller cohort of people that we trust, that will walk with us, pray with us, encourage us, hold us to the fire. That's the kind of thing. And it is a critical part, because if you don't do that well, the new beginning is harder to find. Because the new beginning is defined by your understanding of yourself and your talents and gifts, and a sense of purpose and intention that's going to drive you forward. So neutral zone is not something to be glossed over and avoided. It's something to be embraced and pursued.
Yeah, when you asked that question too, my mind went to an individual who was the CEO of an international company, and leaving that position, you think, oh, new freedoms, but it comes with a lot of changes, and just really appreciated the individual's wisdom to seek out some counsel. How do I do this transition well? I left it well, but I want to transition into a new place in my life. And I don't know what that needs to look like. So yeah, that was just on a personal level to say, and I just actually got a note today from that individual who said, thank you for being part of that process. And here's where we're at now. And so, yeah, it's just kind of fun to hear back when people have made it through. Again, like Jim says, when you're in that middle zone, just even to recognize for any of us that feeling a little bit disorientated is totally normal. Even in that, you can just relax a bit and say, okay, this is normal. I'm not going crazy.
Hey, so I'm kind of wondering here, and please correct me if I'm wrong or if I missed this. At the heart of transition, seems to me, is relationship kind of one of the key things that we need to maneuver. I mean, I know there's a lot of different things that are at play here, but people in relationship keep coming up, and what I'm hearing here would that be correct?
That's very astute. You're quite right, because change often is dealing with, let's say even a company is going to build a brand new, beautiful building. And that is, there's so much associated with that in the building and getting that done and doing the grand opening and on it goes. But if you haven't, maybe you've met somebody needs to meet with your staff and say, what are you going to miss about this place? Okay. If you miss some of those steps, you're right. It takes a bit more time, but you will get it back. I don't know the math that well, but I'm going to guess you'd at least get it back double. It's just well worth your time.
Wow.
I think the other part of that is that in a scenario that Brenda mentioned, one of the things that happens at a corporate level, we have in the past made decisions without talking to the people on the ground. And so an organization is going to go to a new manufacturing location, a bigger place. So why not go to your key people and say, this is your area. This is the kind of space increase you're going to have. How would you change the dynamic of how the product is produced in this area? In other words, including the whole team from the bottom up is so important in any transition. We have an acquaintance of ours. He worked for an international company. He was in safety.
Okay.
And the company he was working with had a significant safety issue with multiple people dying every year in their mines. And so he was brought in to solve the problem. He went to every mine, and he went down into the mine, and he talked to the people on the front line and asked, you remember this person died last year? Tell us what happened and how could it have been prevented? And just by engaging them, the numbers turned around significantly because he was getting it from that lower level rather than from a corporate person who had never been in the basement. So it is critical that in transitions, any transition we make, that we engage people across the organization, that they become part of the process moving forward.
Oh, so good. It's a great reminder that as leaders, regardless of where you are, you need to remember that one of the jobs of a leader is to take care of their people. And one way you can take care of them is by listening, by going in there, acknowledging and helping them walk through that.
And sometimes even articulating it back, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes we don't, including ourselves, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So when we go in, let's say, into an organization or into a church, and we will interview 60, 70 people, and then you hear a common message, then you speak it back and they go, wow, that's right. You mean you heard that from other people? And it begins to put some understanding, some self-awareness into where they're, what they're really feeling. And then once you can identify that, now you can begin to talk about what might the future look like and how might you get there. But until you have that self-awareness where you're at, you're jumping ahead too fast.
You know what I think I want to add from what I've learned from both of you is that you've created safe places as well for people to be able to give feedback. Okay. So where they may not be wanting to go to the new leaders or the past leaders, depending on how it's asked, right? You can do it in one-on-one, you can do them through a survey, but creating those different scenarios, I think, has created the opportunity for people to say, okay, they do want to hear me, they do care, and I can say what I think or not think, right? And so
That's a good point, Walter. And I just, as you were saying that, we always say to people, everything that you say will be shareable, but it will not be identifiable.
Right.
So, maybe we'll say, like, we heard from 50% of the people that this is an issue. So they feel very safe in doing that, right? Because when they know they can be totally honest, and yet it's not going to be, hey, Walter said, but it's rather, here's a common theme that we heard. And we always do a feedback loop back to the leadership particular, and then the leadership approves of the summary that here's what we've heard. Is this true? Do you believe? Yeah, right. Then we share it with a broader group, with either the congregation or the organization that we're working with.
We want clarity around what we've heard. And that clarity increases the organization's trust in what you're promoting or what you're saying is what is. And then as you start thinking about what could be, all of a sudden now they hear their voices over and over again, and they start to take ownership of it. And that ownership is the very thing a leader coming in needs. So to come into an organization and a group of people that say, this is our vision, are you going to help us? They can look at it and say, yeah, I can help you with that, and know that there's this cohort of people that are going to walk with them right away. They don't have to build trust. They just have to be faithful to the vision that they've been presented with.
And you also don't get a leader who comes in, whether it be a CEO or a pastor or whatever it might be. You don't get someone coming in who goes, complete change of direction here. We're going to do something. And the people are just kind of left like, what? So not that they won't bring their own sense to it, and that's important too, and they will revision with folks for sure. But you have someone who comes in to lead them that wants to walk alongside in a common direction and a future that they've preferred together. And that will change over time, and it needs to be revisited on a regular basis, of course. But then you don't have two people or two groups going in opposite directions right from the beginning, which can often happen.
Well, which makes me think the word that you used, Jim, was clarity. And, as leaders, I know there's a lot of different ways to describe leadership, but that word clarity has really kind of been sticking in my mind a lot, because it really comes down to that, how we communicate, how we're perceiving what's being said, what we think is happening. But as leaders, there's always work to be done in clarity. And what you guys are doing, it shows me that at the heart of your work, you're really creating clarity in an organization by bridging this transition time, and hopefully the organization or the individual comes out on the other end in a better place.
One of the things that when we first started into this area of work, one of the things that we talked about was, so in the Second World War, one of the things that allowed the Allies to advance very quickly across the front were called Bailey bridges. These were bridges that were portable, and the German army, as it was moving, was blowing up bridges, and they would come along with a Bailey bridge. They could put a Bailey bridge together in less than 24 hours. And so it didn't slow down their advance. It allowed the Allies to keep moving forward. In all of the churches we've served, major change in terms of pastoral leadership, let's say. But what's happened is as we've come in, we have built a bridge that has allowed that church to continue to grow. Well, you experienced in your situation. Right. During our time there, it wasn't spectacular, but it continued to grow. It continued to move forward, even though it was a time of transition. And I think that's one of the things I like about transition is it helps a group not lose momentum.
Love it.
They keep moving. And that's when you talk about bridging, that's a beautiful example, because bridges are what, if you have a portable bridge that can be set up really quickly, it allows you to keep moving forward.
It's a big picture.
And that's what our ministry is about.
I love it. Like the pace might change, right? You might have to move a little slower here or there, but I love how you use the word momentum. Like you just want to keep on going. You don't want to come to a complete stop, or God forbid, move backwards. Yeah.
That's also a good insight, Walter, because where we talked about earlier that it sometimes a leader or a leadership team might think, oh, this is going to take time. I think you need to balance that with, yes, we'll spend time on things, but we will have momentum. And in the end, you'll see more for that time. But so there is a balance. Yes, some things are going to take more time, doing interviews, having people provide their input, all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, I like that thought about the Bailey Bridge and how it keeps the momentum going.
I love it. So I'm wondering, in your opinion, from your experience, is there a part that has been more challenging for leaders or for organizations, like the end, the neutral, or the new beginnings, or is it just dependent, or have you noticed one to kind of stick out more when it comes to a challenge?
I think the challenge we've experienced is helping people understand why transition needs to happen.
Okay.
I mean, that's part of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Alongside that is individuals. There's often individuals in every congregation we've served who have basically, we're halfway through the process. We're 9 months into it, and they're still saying, why is it taking so long? What's happening next? And so that is a consistent drag on because we have a sense. I mean, we lay out for a team an 18-month process. Right. I mean, we can go through and say, we're here. We can check it off, and they can see how we're going. But translating that from the leadership team to the congregation becomes an issue. And even where we've had with large multiple staffs, it's keeping them engaged in understanding where we're at so that they don't start to get antsy about things. So I think just helping people, continually reminding people of what the process is, why we need to do it, that's been one of the harder things to keep going forward.
Wow.
For me, I think the new beginning is exciting. So let's start there. It's exciting. There's new things that people are a little bit nervous, but there's an excitement that carries them. The ending can be difficult. We've worked with some of the staff that have had a hard time of doing exactly what we're talking about, disengaging from a previous leader. Perhaps they are still identifying with how things used to be, and they don't want to do things different. And so they are not able to deal with the endings. And if they don't deal with the endings, that I find challenging. And then I think the next areas, as I mentioned, is the neutral zone, because people love clarity. and not to have clarity is hard for people. And so that's when they need a lot of kind of encouragement and support and showing them where they've come from and where they're, what things are ahead. But I think for me, it's watching people have to work through endings and then into the neutral zone.
I would say the other place is in the new beginnings. So in a church context, for example, we're looking for a lead pastor to come in. In that scenario, we haven't experienced it personally, but a number of our colleagues have, where finding that next leader has taken a year, 2 years after the transition process has been done. And that is very discouraging. In one situation, a person came in, candidated at the church, presented in the morning. In the evening, he said to the board, we've decided this isn't for us, and they walked away. And so the church was left, in a sense, devastated. And so that can be hard. Yeah. But transition leaders in all those situations where we talked about, they've made commitments to stay on, to mentor them through that time. And there has been, but that is one of the things that the season of waiting for that new leader is difficult.
Like delayed new beginnings is what you're talking.
It's a delayed new beginning.
When there's a delay to that, for sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Is there something that sticks out to both of you about what's been the most rewarding part of a transition? I mean, maybe we're at the risk of stating the obvious, but is there maybe you have a favorite part of transition?
Sure, I'll start with that. We just have loved hearing people's stories, making sense of people's stories, helping, feeding it back to them, how amazing their story is, and then helping them find a new path. So the people along the way have been quite amazing. And even when we talk about transition, Jim and I have chosen to, oftentimes if we've been heavily involved, let's say 18 months to 2 years in one particular place, we will give ourselves a chance just to break, to disengage from that before we take on a new scenario, simply because we recognize that transition also needs to do that. So we try to practice what we preach here, so to speak.
I love it.
I think one of the things that has been life-giving for me, and I say this quite often to lead teams when I'm being introduced, is I like being the person that doesn't have to be involved in the politics.
That objective voice.
Objective voice. Right. Because the reality is that it is not our issues. It's that lead team's issues. And so I can speak into it and I can let it go because I don't have to make it happen. I can mentor them, I can guide them, I can coach them, but I don't have to own it. And that is, Brenda and I love the church. And we love being in a position where we can help them see the future and recognize that, we're not going to have to take ownership of it. It's theirs. And we make that clear. And that's one of the reasons why Brenda says we need to take a break. That we love it. And there's been times where we longed to say, it'd be nice to be able to stay. But then you go, but it wouldn't be wise to stay. And so you have to step back. And that is a hard part, but it is also a part that is, it's just life-giving in that process.
Wow. I love that. So if there's a leader that finds himself with a group of people, a team, do you have something that you can share with us? How can we help others transition well? And I'm very aware that there's a lot of moving parts, but is there something that as leaders we can say, hey, we want to encourage you in this way? Is there something that kind of sticks in your mind right now?
I guess what comes to me, you're asking how we might encourage others to help others, is not to try and fix things, especially might be true of some genders more than others, men loving to fix things. But I think to listen, to recognize that there is a process, and that if they're in a stage of grief, let them grieve. If they're in a stage of it feels confusing, That's okay. Just encourage them. If they're in the stage of new beginnings, enjoy it with them. Don't let them be tempted to turn back if things get a little hard. So yeah, let them be in the stage they're at and cheer them on, and don't try to fix it. That's what I'd say.
I love that. Mm.
And don't be in a hurry.
And don't be in a hurry.
I think every organization, when a leader leaves, struggles with the fact that, where are we going to go? Mm. Who's going to lead us? Those are questions that pop up, right? Mm-hmm. And so for a leadership team to jump to answer that question too quickly is a problem.
Yeah.
And so being patient and taking time, listen to the people around you, hear them out, make a plan, and then work the plan. Those are important things to do.
Make a plan, work the plan, like it.
Yeah. I like that. Okay, well, I consider you guys world-class leaders. I think, the work that you do is super important. And it's not just local leadership that you provided. Like we've already stated, you went overseas, you did some work in Spain and France, you've done different organizations. And I know that you also coach and mentor individuals. Like your work is the ripple effect that's coming out of that. I think it's amazing. And so please hear my heart on that. And so I think I've learned so much from you. You have some great leadership qualities and you've given us a lot already, but is there a leadership advice that kind of comes to the forefront that you go, this is probably the best leadership advice that I've been given or that I've been practicing, or whatever you want to give us? What comes to mind?
We've had a lot of great teachers along the way. What would be the greatest advice is...
You think? I think one of the best advice I've had in terms of my ministry is hiring people that are better than me.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree.
It just makes sense. You're the leader, but if you can find people better than you in specific areas, go for it. Take them on, and then don't get in their way. That's the second part of that. You can hire people better than yourself, but then you can get in their way. And you have to have a self-awareness that allows you to make room for other people to take leadership in your sphere. So.
And I think that one of the things that we've learned is maybe through some of the different things like strength finders that we've done is find out what people's giftings are, and allow them to really shine in those areas. That would be, that's what I would say has been kind of a key takeaway for me and something I've tried to follow. So help people find out what their giftings are and then allow them to function in that role. So.
I love it. Oh, I love it. Okay, so we're going to wrap up, and this has been so good. I think we can go for hours talking about this, but you are on the It Matters podcast, and I do have a little tradition that I love to ask my guests, what matters to you right now? There's a lot probably going on in your life, and I can probably think of a couple of things that matter to you, but I want to hear from you. In this moment, in this season, is there something that sticks out to you? Like, what matters to you?
In terms of anything?
Anything. Anything. Is there something? It could be family based. It could be your work that you're doing. But what's the focus right now?
Wow. Well, I think right now we're in a place. My father passed this past year, and my mom is trying to go through the transition of what is it like to, after 70 years of being married to the same person, who am I without my husband? And so transition is all around us in our family and our friends. And so we're just trying to walk that journey with other people and figure it out for ourselves too. And so it's transition is very practical.
Wow.
And since we stepped out of ministry roles end of February, for the first time in our lives, we've had to try to figure out where to go to church.
Okay.
And we've never had to do that before. We've always been hired into a role, and we've always been welcomed into the role. But now we walk into a church unknown, and you go, does it fit? And we have different questions. And so you go, okay, Lord, in this time of transition, the neutral zone is the most important part of our lives right now. It's listening to who God says we are, figuring out what is important to us, what will give us purpose and intention. And so, we're in that neutral zone in a sense.
Wow.
That will lead us to a new beginning.
Right.
Wow. I love it. Like I said, you guys, I love the work that you do. I love you guys. Thank you so much for coming on this episode and just giving us so much wisdom. I know that you're going to impact whether whoever you are listening to this episode, whether you're a faith leader or not. You gave us today things that do matter, that we need to consider, we need to work through, and transition is a big part of that. And so I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule and joining me on the It Matters podcast.
Thank you so much. We've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Awesome. So this concludes our time together, but how can people get a hold of you if they want to have any questions for you, or they want to touch base, or maybe even want to consider being mentored by you? Is there a way that they can connect with you?
The email that we would be using is jwregehr @gmail.com.
Okay, we'll put that in the show notes. We'll make sure people get that. And if people want to ask questions in the comments, if you want to share this episode, do so, because I'll make sure that if there's some questions that we can direct them to you. But share this episode, like it, and just give it to somebody that needs to hear this. And because on this podcast, we're trying to make you better. We're trying to make you a better leader, add value to you. Because we say around here that it's a win-win when the leader leads well. And I think that's what happened here today. So until next episode, thank you guys. And we'll...
Thank you.
Yes. All right.